Chapter 8, A Thought About Dining Out. The words of Cameron Wolfer. My dad is and will always be a very nurturing guy. He would be there when we came home from kindergarten, ready to be tackled by our unstoppable energy. He would allow us to develop our own forts out of the dining room table. He would make sure that dinner was always on the table, and at his most exasperated, he would only sigh in a characteristic show of frustration, which was a pretty mild reaction considering the terrors we could be at that young age. No matter the diagnosis, he was always on the sidelines, cheering for his children when they participated in sports. And yet, my dad is also a hard worker. He would dutifully go off to work for years before his diagnosis to clean offices. I remember loving to go to work with Dad on Take Your Child to Work Day because I got a pair of really neat gloves and a Snickers bar out of the deal. This continued pattern did not change until about a decade after his diagnosis. And now Chapter 8. Have you ever heard someone use the expression, "It's right there, right on the tip of my tongue"? I mean, I think that most people realize that this is not a real direct reference to a thought or a phrase that is actually sitting right on the tip of your tongue, as if it was just waiting for you to reach into your mouth and pull out a piece of paper. A piece of paper which would be in pretty close resemblance to the little notes that you find in a fortune cookie. Although, what at first may appear to be a tiny and very helpful thing, a little note like this could potentially turn into yet another obstacle for me on what is already a very long list of choking hazards. It might be nice for others if this was the way it worked, and it seems like it might be a simple thing, but alas, this isn't the case. Since I have limited resources available, what would be great though is if I could divert the wattage or the brain power, which is used up by trying to retrieve those several lost thoughts, to other areas in my system that are falling behind in their duties. I'm mainly thinking about my cerebellum, because even though having an SCA might not directly correlate with the retrieval of a wayward and missing thought, just trying to grab one and drag it into place where the idea can then be used in actual conversation causes the same sort of sensation in me as does any of my physical limitations. This kind of situation actually happens to me quite a bit. Often it can feel as if someone is dangling a thought or a phrase, the exact one that I'm looking for, just out of reach, as if I were a circus animal and I'm being asked to sit up and beg for a paying audience. But what usually happens is that the minute I stop trying so hard to pull the thought into my grasp, it will suddenly just appear right in front of me like it was hiding in plain sight this whole time. All that I have to do now is reach out and take it. Although with an SCA, I will have to grasp at the thought a few times before I can wrap my mind's clumsy and wooden fingers around it and obtain a firm hold. However, grasp it I finally do, and experience has shown me that once I maintain a solid grip on a thought, I really need to clutch it in a stranglehold and write it down just as quickly as I can. Sometimes it feels as if I only have minutes before the thought will squirm itself out of my embrace, spring off the tip of my tongue where I initially found it, and slip off into the night, never to be heard or seen of again. Recently, however, I have been able to throttle a few thoughts about my personal experiences with dining out into submission, and I would like to share them with you. When it comes to eating out in in a meal in a restaurant, be it fine dining, casual, or fast food, I've been pondering on the importance of the proper attire. I knew that there had to be a connection between the choice of color or the style of clothing worn and that of the restaurant that becomes the selected place to dine. But the thought kept eluding me. I knew it was there, but I continued to dangle and swing seductively just beyond my grasp. That is, until the most recent time that I found myself sitting down for a meal in a restaurant. After looking at all the carnage that I had left on the table, and the food that I had spilled on myself by the end of the meal, the thought finally edged close enough for me to grab hold of it. It finally dawned on me that I should be ordering my meal based solely on the color of the clothing I'm wearing. So an example of this kind of system would be only to order, let's say, the guacamole burger when I am wearing a green shirt. This way I can walk out of the establishment with my head held high and not resembling someone who has just spent a month engaged in a really high intensity food fight. Of course, I could always wear neutral colored clothing when eating out, but this would mean that I would have to stick to water, and spilling water in my lap may lead others to arrive at some pretty highly undesirable conclusions once I stand up to try and exit the building. Maybe if I just always stuck to wearing black, because everything goes well with black, so it wouldn't matter what color of food that I had chosen to order. Plus, bonus, black makes you look thinner, which means that I could feel good about ordering a dessert. Portion sizes, when this is an option, I've also discovered to be an important part of consideration. When ordering a meal in a restaurant, if I'm hungry, which just so happens to keep continuing to occur quite regularly, then I find that I need to order enough so that there will be a sufficient amount of food to evenly distribute onto the table, the floor, my clothing, and yet still provide me enough food to actually eat. So besides obvious reasons like my age, I wouldn't order a kid's meal, especially if I was planning on getting anything to eat. I do, however, wish it would come with a cool toy with the larger orders, which seems to be a discrimination to me, but that's a subject for a later time. Sometimes I've simply wondered if it wouldn't simply be a whole lot easier to order an empty plate, sit in the booth for about 20 minutes, tip the waiter, and then go home. Or maybe one of Willy Wonka's sticks of gum that offer a full course meal. A close connection to the choice of portion size is the utensil that you select. I will always choose a chopstick, as long as the chopstick is rounded at the end and can aid me by being used with one hand as a scoop, and, well, pretty much resembles a spoon in every other way. So, by this definition of the chopstick, I guess what I'm trying to convey here is that, bottom line, I'm always going to choose a spoon over a stick whenever I find the option to do so. I do this for several reasons. One of which is because the spoon permits me to carry a larger payload to my mouth, allowing at the same time for a certain percentage of the food to fall off on its way to my upward journey. Also because the fork has sharp prongs that become potential WOMDs, or weapons of my destruction, with each bite that I attempt. I have also been known to fling forkfuls of my meal onto the floor while seeking to cut the food into mouth-sized portions. I apply so much pressure to cutting that when the fork severs the piece of meat I am cutting, my hand just doesn't stop, and I launch the food into space. Doing so would be a very neat trick if it was intentional. Like when someone throws food up in the air and catches it in their mouth. I could do this if the object were to not grab the food in my mouth, but rather to hit myself in the eye, the forehead, or the throat. When this cutting and flinging occurs at my home, my dogs are the only ones who benefit. This phenomenon also manifests itself when I try to scoop ice cream. Only this time, this has come to be referred to as the scoop and toss. It's the ataxia version of a game I played as a kid with little square beanbags called Toss-A-Cross. The only difference here is, to being like the replica, is that I like to play Toss-A-Cross, but I wasn't very good at it. However, I don't enjoy the ataxia fling, but I appear to be quite good at that. You may find it frustrating, but the one thing I've always told myself is that I need to continue to do those things which I'm good at. I find the ataxia fling to be an event of constant annoyance, but this truth does not mean that I do not let myself embrace it. I mean, I have a moment of anger with myself, but in the end, I discovered that I can have a check at my own expense, and I find enjoyment in the aftermath. Flinging is my strength, so I should have fight it. So with this in mind, I envision a restaurant that is entirely owned and operated by those with the handicap of ataxia. It could be named Sheep Spastiques, and a potential theme would be where good friends are always welcome and the food is always flying. Everything would be made and cooked in a big glass encased room that would be in a central location and surrounded by the dining room so that everyone would have and enjoy an unencumbered view of the kitchen. Doing it this way would serve a dual purpose. Watching food being prepared and thrown around by the cook staff would be an educational experience, but would also act as a means in which to provide the night's entertainment. So Sheep Spastiques would sort of be like going to a dinner theater, and there would, of course, be a cover charge as such. All drinks would be personally shaken only by default, not stirred, and the water glasses would be double the size of regular water glasses that you would find at a regular sit-down restaurant. That way, by the time the wait person arrives at your table and half the water has sloshed out while they walked, you will still receive a nice amount of ice water. There would be a dress code. However, since my SCA will be accompanying me, the use of rubber clothing or bibs would be very strongly recommended and encouraged, and of course available to rent at a kiosk that will be located in the front foyer. And of course there would be a theme night. The most popular theme night I predict would be Food Fight Night, although I can't figure out exactly why or even how this night might stand out as being any different than any other night at Sheep Spastiques. Well, whatever the case, to coin an old phrase, I wouldn't just be the owner, but I would also be a client. And I know that I would enjoy eating there. Would you like me to make you a reservation?